Hi there, I'm Susanna. This is Kenny.
Hi, everyone.
And we are from Senetru. And we are here today because we just released our new book, A Brood of Vipers, The History of Corruption in the Institutional Church.
Yeah, book just released today, April 5th, which is Resurrection Sunday. You can get the book on our website, which is Senetru, Senetru.com. You can go there. We have all of our books are available in a free PDF download, or you can order the books by going through our website to the Amazon site, and you can order a Kindle e-reader version, or you can get a paperback version of the book, but it's available now.
So we're just going to have a little chat so you can learn a little bit more about this book. First, I am just curious if you could tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so this book is a little bit different than Senetru's usual writings.
Yes, it sure is.
Folks know we've done Unmasking the Beast, we have The False Door, we have Carry the Light, and now we have A Brood of Vipers, The History of Corruption in the Institutional Church. So this is not a full-blown history book. It traces a thread throughout history, and we go from some rebukes that Jesus issued in the book of Matthew, and then we go through the early church in Acts and talk about what the real church looked like, and then we sort of transition into what and how the institutional church got started. So we talk about the origination of doctrine, the origination of translation, and we take history all the way from that time to today in America.
Yep. Why was this book written?
Yeah, so many folks know who've been following us, or if you don't follow us, I'm going to tell you right now, but we have done a lot of work to unearth the original intent and meaning of Scripture. We found through research, through our study, which has been only using the Bible in the original transcripts, original Greek and Hebrew, we found through our study that a lot of the Bible, Scripture, had been changed to modern day understanding. And with that modern day understanding, a lot of imported assumptions came into the text, and it changed the meaning of the Bible completely. Mm-hmm. And as we found those changes, we started to ask ourselves questions of why did this get changed? And the meanings of words have been completely flattened,
yep.
Right?
Flattened.
That's our word, flattened.
Yes, we love that word.
And big words too. Big words like the Logos, which is the will and intent of God, has been flattened into meaning the Bible or Jesus alone. And the Logos is not that. The Logos is the will and intent of God, which is made known in Jesus and made known in others who are carrying the will and intent of God when they're surrendered to him. The other word is love. That word love, there's I think 4 or 5 different terms in Greek that are used in the New Testament that all get translated into the word love. So they don't mean the same thing when you dig down to the original Greek meaning. As we looked at the meaning of words, I started researching how translation began from the Roman Empire. And a man named Jerome, the translator,
yep.
Just Jerome, no last name, not like Smith or anything. But Jerome translated Scripture through the directive of Rome. And it was interesting because when he translated Scripture, doctrine had already been established. So they weren't translating Scripture in order to determine what the Bible said. They were translating Scripture using doctrine to determine what the translation would say. Jerome had warned folks that by translating from Greek and Hebrew, the meaning would be lost. He warned that whenever you translate, meaning was lost. And yet he was still directed to do it anyway. So that really is what led the charge to start looking into the history of how the church got established. We knew that the word ecclesia, which is church, in the Bible did not mean what people think it means. Mm-hmm. And we started looking at things like Stephen's charge in Acts, where he says, God does not dwell in a temple made with human hands. And we look at Jesus's charges saying, he's going to destroy this temple in 3 days. And we looked at the original purpose. The actual purpose of the new covenant was to remove the institution, remove the temple structure from the entire realm, and just give a direct access to God through Christ. And that was the way that it was supposed to be. And obviously that's not the way it is now. And so that led us to start writing this book.
Okay. So who is this book written for? Who might be interested in it?
Yeah, you have to be willing to really be open and take an honest look. And you're going to hear things. We heard things in the process of writing this book that were alarming and shook the foundation of what we knew to be true. And you have to be willing to hear it. You have to be willing to hear stuff that is different than what the history books say, because the victors write history, and this comes at it from a little bit different angle. I think if you have been in the church and were wondering why it doesn't feel right, this is going to show you why it doesn't feel right. If you still go to church and you go, every Sunday or whatever, and you're wondering why does this not feel or look like the Church of Acts? You're asking that question because it's not like the Church of Acts. It's not even remotely close. And if you're asking those questions, this book is for you. If you immediately are bristled by every word I'm saying, ignore it. Don't even pay attention to it. It's not going to do you any good.
No. Okay. How did you go about pulling together the information for this book, and what informed that information?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I'm not a historian. I felt called to write this book, as I mentioned before, as we started to dig into how scripture was translated. That was the first kind of hint into this. And then we started pulling a thread. And as I wrote this book, again, we came across alarming realizations, and we did a lot of online research. We researched what the victors said. We researched as much as we could find of what those who were persecuted said. Unfortunately, very often their books were burned along with them in many cases. In fact, there are stories in here of people whose writings were burned at the stake with them. But as we pulled on the threads, I really started to ask questions like, why did the church, not the Church of Acts, but why did the church that came out of the Council of Nicaea need to enforce doctrine in such a strong way where they would send people into exile and eventually begin murdering people, breaking families apart, taking children? Why would they need to do that? What was the necessity behind that? Because that's not something that I see in scripture from the early church. That's why we frame up the early church as well. So we don't see that type of activity of forced doctrine onto people. So I started to ask the question, why did they do this? Why would somebody do this? And I started to ask another question, which is, what is the spirit behind this? When I look at well-documented history of murders that occurred, or killings, mass killings that occurred due to failure to adhere to a doctrine, I have to ask myself, what is the spirit behind that? And why do those who completed such atrocities, why are they looked at as founders of the faith that remains in place today in the Christian church in America, the largest Christian church in the world? So that really is how I dove into things. We were very conservative in how we researched to make sure that we weren't, there's a lot of, again, the victors wrote the stories, and the information that you see in this book is what they said about themselves. And
there's a lot of numbers.
There's a lot of numbers in here that are very conservative.
Yeah.
And if the victors wrote it, so if the ones who were persecuted wrote it, these numbers may be way higher.
Yeah.
And the reality behind it might be much higher. The other thing I want to mention is that as we began writing this book, is that I started to realize that in the New Testament, Jesus, Paul, John, Peter, they all were talking about being in the end times already, and they were talking about those who were true followers of Christ being persecuted. And it came about a lot quicker than I think the world thinks. And the church today looks out there saying, when is this Antichrist going to come? When is this persecution, this persecuted church going to come? And it's already come. It's already been here. Revelation we've been living out Revelation for 1700 years. And the testimony is there. The testimony is in the Bible. You can dispute it all you want. It's irrelevant if you dispute it. It's irrelevant if I dispute it. Whatever is true, and that's what's going to hold. And that's what we had to come to the realization of, is that these apostles, Jesus himself, were telling the story about something that was coming very, very soon. And it happened really, really quickly. And there's a verse in Peter where Peter says that the way of truth is blasphemed by the many. And that verse has stuck out, I know, for both Susanna and I.
Yeah.
Because the way of truth is true belief, and the many is the majority. It's saying the way of true belief is blasphemed by the majority. A critical element of that is the majority are those who think they are true believers. So it's a majority of those who think that they are true believers are the ones who have blasphemed the truth. Blaspheme means to put into disrepute. And that means that they have made a bad name for the true God, for Yahweh. And I think we look out into the world today, and the church would deny this completely, but the world would look at the church and say, I agree with that completely. The God that you claim to serve looks horrible based on what you stand for. And that is exactly what I would say as well. The excuses that are made on behalf of God are unacceptable. The excuses that are going to be made in response to the murders that were completed in this book is ridiculous. People are going to defend folks like John Calvin and Martin Luther and those in Rome who were doing the persecuting. They're going to defend the Lutheran Church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church. They're going to defend the American Church. And all of this has just been persecution on top of persecution. And Jesus talked about that the blood of the prophets is on the hands of those who continue to allow that type of belief to exist. And that blood, the blood of the prophets, is on the church today still, as long as they hold that same framework.
Okay, last question. Tell me about 45,000 denominations.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I didn't even know this, but and the number is actually higher than this. I believe it's over 47,000 now. But
we're being conservative with numbers, though.
One of the things that we trace throughout, I mentioned there's a thread that we trace, and that thread, I'll give it to you right now. The thread is that since the Council of Nicaea, where doctrine was first formed, there was beliefs that were put in place by the institutional church that remain today. The main thing that's still held today is that the institution has a hierarchy behind it, when in fact the institution is a structure, the institution has a hierarchy, and men serve as mediators. That structure was not in place, no matter what anybody says. It was not in place in the early church. There were functions and roles, but there was not hierarchy. There was never hierarchy. There were people who had gifts, never hierarchy. Those gifts came from the Spirit, not because you were put in a role and had a business card or stated your name as pastor, reverend, whatever it may be. So that's one of them. The second one is that the Nicene Trinitarian doctrine is a through line all the way to today. It's the one single piece of doctrine that is dominant in the Christian church today. It's not in all of them, but it is dominant. 90+% of the Christian churches in the world today adhere to the Trinity doctrine. It's in their belief statements. It's in their doctrinal statements. If you go to a church's website, you will find it there. The other thing that we identified from the Council of Nicaea to today is that the church could not do anything but divide. The bigger it got, the more divided it became. And that leads to the 45,000, right? There's 45, as I said, I think there's 47 now, but we'll go with 45. There's 45,000 plus Christian denominations that exist in the world today. In the world today. This includes non-denominational. Non-denominational is just a denomination. And it has its own set of beliefs. So the big question we had to ask after that was maybe obvious, and it's, if the Spirit of God is speaking to all of these institutions, how is he saying something different? Like I said, the only through line is the institutional hierarchy and structure and the Nicene Trinitarian formula. Everything else, from end times eschatology to gifts of the Spirit to should women teach in the church to what do you do with your children?
Yep, it's all different.
It's all those doctrines are different, and every time there's disagreement in a church, they split off and another church is formed. That's why you have 45,000 plus. We've got one Father, one Spirit, one teacher, Christ, but we have 45,000 different versions. And that is alarming in itself.
Yep.
So yeah, we hope you check out this book. Again, it's available on our website, senetru.com, free PDF. None of our stuff costs money if you can't afford it. If you want a paperback copy, you do got to pay for it because it goes through Amazon, as well as the e-reader version. We have other books as well. We've got another book coming out in a month, but we hope you check out this one. It'll shake your foundation for sure.
A little bit. And we're going to be starting a podcast on this in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So we'll be going through chapter by chapter and kind of pulling the whole thing apart and explaining it
We
in
hope
detail.
we hope you join us for the podcast.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye.